Hi, I'm Rabbi Dunner. Welcome to my weekly Erev Shabbat Dvar Torah. The late Rabbi Norman Lamb writes that he was once presiding over a theology study group, and they were discussing what each of them would do if they knew that they were going to die in exactly 4 weeks. Everyone had their ideas. One guy said he would go to Jerusalem and he'd pray at the Western Wall and he would study Torah. Another person said he would dedicate all of his remaining time to charitable work. He would help the poor and he'd help the homeless, and so it went on. Then one guy piped up, I think if I knew I was going to die in 4 weeks' time, I would go to my mother-in-law's house for the 4 weeks. Well, guess what? That was a real conversation stopper. Everyone looked at him dumbfounded. What are you talking about? Why would you do that? He smiled, because that would make it the longest 4 weeks of my life. Everyone laughed. On that note, I had a thought earlier this week. At some point over the next few months, I have this feeling that I'm going to open one of the major newspapers. Maybe it be the New York Times or the LA Times or the Washington Post. I'm going to turn to the death announcements, the death notices, the obituaries page, and it's going to say as follows. Listen. World, this, passed away yesterday morning after a long illness. Death came quietly instead of by nuclear explosion. No survivors, no mourners. Services will be conducted in heaven by a very relieved Creator. I know. It sounds ridiculous. But is it really so ridiculous? The way we are headed, it's not a thought, it's a reality. It's just a hard-headed analysis of the world as we know it. The world is so sick. The world is totally on its knees. Definitely a candidate for the obituary columns. Let me give you a few quick examples of the world's death-inducing symptoms. Every major democracy in the Western world is under threat from the extremes and also from apathy. No one can agree on anything. Democracies are coming apart at the seams. There's violence, there's crime, there's hatred, there's prejudice, extremism, the full range of problems. And our miracle country, Israel, it's not immune. The Israeli government is perpetually on the brink of collapse. Elections every 5 minutes. Israel's citizens seem to be so divided. There's the right wing, there's the left wing, the religious, secular, Ashkenazim, Sephardim, and I'm not even talking about the threats that exist from Gaza, Palestinian terrorists, Lebanon, Syria, and the worst one of all, Iran. This week we celebrated 73 years since Israel became an independent country, and it seems that not 1 year of those 73 years has been devoid of a significant dangerous incident. Not 1 year has been free of threats. I mean war, delegitimization, economic sanctions and boycotts. So what exactly are we celebrating? We're always on the brink of doom. How exactly is that a cause for joy? The world is very sick at the moment, and we should definitely wish it a speedy recovery. The world is in desperate need of a refuah shalema. And yet, although I'm not a political expert, nor am I a medical expert, I would like to suggest that there is a basic difference, in fact, a fundamental difference between Israel's problems and the problems everywhere else in the world. The best way for me to describe these differences is by drawing your attention to Tazria and Metzora. Both of these sedras describe conditions which lead to a state of impurity, conditions which require a process of purification. The difference is that the first condition described by the Parshat is childbirth, and the procedure of purification a mother has to go through after having a baby. But then the Torah changes direction and describes something called tzara'at, a horrible disease that affects someone who is busy with lashon hara or engaged in some other kind of antisocial behavior. The rabbis of the Talmud say that someone who is a Mezorah is like a dead person. How strange that these two sets of laws follow one another. One talks about birth, life. The other one speaks of tzara'at, death. What is the underlying message? Years ago, I remember my mother coming home one day to discover our house in a total mess. And at the centre of the mess was one of my brothers, looking very sheepish. "What in heaven's name is going on?" she asked him. He looked very embarrassed. "I'm tidying up," he said. "What are you talking about? Are you crazy? My house has never been so messy." My brother smiled. And here, his yeshiva Talmud education came into play. "There's two types of mess," he told my mother. "There's a mess that just gets more messy. And then there's a mess that is part of the process of tidying up. And the thing is, the two messes may look exactly the same, but they're totally different." I guess that is the type of logic you should expect from your child if you send them to yeshiva to study Gemara. Now, I can't remember what my mother's response was, but that answer has always stuck with me. It is a good yardstick to judge different situations. The Mishnah in Pirkei Avot teaches us the difference between an argument for the sake of heaven, l'shem shamayim, and an argument that is not for the sake of heaven. The first is best illustrated by the arguments between Hillel and Shammai, and the second, not l'shem shamayim, is epitomized by the argument of Korach. There are so many explanations for this Mishnah, but perhaps my brother's answer is the clearest. When there is an argument, what type of argument is it? Is it an argument that will result in a constructive conclusion? And if it is, it's an argument for the sake of heaven. But if not, in other words, if it's an argument where the combatants simply want to be destructive, they want to make a bigger mess, that kind of argument is never l'shem shamayim, for the sake of heaven. Korach wasn't interested in peace, he was only interested in chaos. But Hillel and Shammai, they were motivated by a love of Torah. And at the end of the day, they knew that one opinion would prevail and the argument would be over. The mess would be gone. The Torah deliberately puts these two conditions, childbirth and tzara'at, alongside each other. That's because the Torah wants to train us that things which look the same may in fact be totally different. Israel's internal wrangling, its self-doubts, its many challenges, all this is a mess that will ultimately bring out the best in Israeli and Jewish society. It may look like a mess to you and me, but in reality it is a prelude to great things. We have good reason to hope that Israel will emerge from this and every one of its messes with renewed faith and stronger in every possible way. In Sefer Devarim it says about the priests, "V'al piem yeh kol riv v'chol nega." By them shall be decided every controversy and every plague. The Gemara asks in two places, in Masechet Sanhedrin and Masechet Nida, what is the relation between controversy and plagues? Why would the Torah mention them in one sentence? The answer is that they sometimes seem alike. They both appear as illnesses, as sicknesses, as weaknesses, but there is a vast difference between them. The arguments and infighting can be a part of a difficult process of coming to great decisions, but there are others that are destructive. They're a plague. My friends, it is this yardstick that we must use when judging the problems and challenges of the world. For example, is it a constructive controversy when the UN condemns Israel? Are they looking to improve things? Or, and this is more likely, is it a negad tzara'at, a mortal illness, a fatal malady? In other words, when we look at a problem, is it a mess that is getting messier, or is it a mess that seems messy, but actually it is just the stage before everything is made tidy and neat? We need to work all our lives in everything that we do, even if it involves disagreements and occasionally difficult conflicts, to ensure that our ultimate aim is rebirth and renewal, not death and destruction. That is the message of Tazria and Metzora, and that is the core message of being a Jew. Wishing you Shabbat Shalom and Chodesh Tov for the month of Iyar. Good Shabbos, good Shabbos.